South Africa's unemployment rate has fallen to its lowest level in more than 5 years. This figure is to 31.4% in the fourth quarter of last year, down from 31.9% in the previous quarter. The improvement was driven by job gains in the community and social services as well as construction sectors. While the drop offers a modest boost for Africa's most industrialized economy, unemployment remains stubbornly high, with rates staying above 30% since the peak of the pandemic in 2020. Chris Hart is the Executive Chairman at Impact Africa Investment, and he joins me live now from Johannesburg in South Africa to discuss the latest South Africa's unemployment rates. Chris Hart, good morning. Great to see you. All right, thank you so much for making the time this morning. Let's walk me through the latest unemployment figure, by the way, 31.4% in the last quarter. How meaningful is this 0.5% change decline in the context of a structurally high unemployment in Africa's most advanced economy?
Yeah, I think if one goes back and looks at the figures have really been a little bit up, a little bit down, but around this particular level. I think from a quarter-to-quarter basis, I think you picked up that slightly more than 40,000 jobs created, but more than 100,000, about more than 120,000 people, in fact, leaving the workforce. And that, of course, is a concern. That, in other words, one's got to be aware of the statistics that are in, how the statistics are made up. And so it's not really much of an improvement in the unemployment rate as such, because there were more discouraged workers in the system that actually, compared to people who actually gained employment. And this is why one needs to look at it over time. What is the trend? And the trend is something that's happened where it's specifically above the 30% mark. It's been persistent above that now for quite some time. We need to start seeing a trend. So although it's down in this quarter, if it bounces back next quarter, then obviously this decrease is not really of much value. All right. In other words, it's really just a statistical noise that we're seeing. We need to start seeing this numbers trend down with the number of people gaining jobs more than the number of people that are discouraged. That's basically the two key metrics that I'd be looking for to see if these trends are meaningful. Obviously, the decline in the headline number here is something to be encouraged, but we do need to see the internal statistics also follow up through that.
Interesting. Employment increased by 44,000, Chris, yet the labor force declined by 128,000. Does that reflect improving job absorption or continued discouragement among job seekers in South Africa?
It's more about discouragement than job creation. It's just there's, in fact, you could say, a net more than 80,000 people that are, that are actually still out of work, but not classified as unemployed. That's basically what it is that the number of people gained. We need to appreciate also in the context of South Africa, where we need more than 16 million people that actually need jobs at this stage. We need to see the economic growth pick up. The biggest thing is the economic growth is at a level where it's really just going to tread water. It's not going to do too much. We've got, internally in the numbers we saw pick up in agriculture. That's often very seasonal, and of course the increase in tariffs that we're seeing with the US, where a lot of agricultural produce is in fact delivered to the US, is that may well come under threat, over the next few quarters. We've still got to see the full effect of that in time. If South Africa is continue to include in AGOA or not included in AGOA would also be another factor as to what's creating it. But certainly in the manufacturing sector, we've seen the effect where the manufacturing jobs specifically are continuing to come down in what we call as a process of deindustrialization, as we import more in manufactured goods and make less manufactured goods at home.
All right. So if you look at unemployment down 172,000, which sectors or demographic groups are driving this improvement, or is it broad-based across every sector of the economy?
It's largely focused in the blacks amongst black, and that's because of the numbers. It's the sheer numbers. Black people make up more than 80%, 87% of the population. It will reflect accordingly, right, in the in their unemployment numbers as well.
All right, so look at this chart again. Community, social services, construction, finance, and agriculture led those job gains. Do these trends suggest a shift in South Africa's growth drivers?
Very much so. Of course, with social services, it's pretty much government spending driven. In other words, it's what we call the grant economy. In other words, where people get grants and then spend that into the economy, and that is one thing. It's what you call a very consumption-driven part of the economy rather than investment-driven, and that's the concern. We need to have investment-driven growth rather than consumption-led growth, because the consumption-led growth is also being led by debt, and we're reaching limits on terms of the debt carrying capacity, where that the option to continue with a consumption-driven growth model is basically running out of capacity.
Okay, so trade and manufacturing recorded significant job losses. I also saw them that chart. The mining sector also was in the negative position. So what risk do these declines pose for a real productivity in South Africa, household consumption, GDP growth going forward? 1% over the last several quarters. That's growing seriously suboptimal for an economy such as South Africa.
Yeah, so I think what is interesting about the mining statistics is that we've got mining prices, things like platinum and gold prices, reaching record highs in just recent months, and that should be underpinning the unemployment or the employment prospects in that particular sector. So it was surprising to see a decline. There may well have been some seasonal factors, right, and rotational factors that came in there. But I think in time we may actually see more mining jobs created, right, and that might be where we get job growth in agriculture and in mining, because we're seeing commodity prices rise that supports those sectors very strongly. I think the mining sector, which has struggled in South Africa, there's rules and regulations that have been adversely affected. We've got a lot of major companies that have been exiting South Africa, Shell, the oils exit, more recently, etc. That would be a concern. We need to start to attract investment back into that sector, especially given the high prices there. But we have to assure, I think regulatory certainty needs to be improved.
Okay, so if we take it into the investment sphere, as it were, how can South Africa attract more investment that can help create jobs? If you look at the financial market as well, do you think this jobs data has anything how the market will interpret the latest data and for investors?
Yeah, so basically the unemployment data is not going to give too much, from an investment side point of view. I think we're going to look to see the budget coming up. The budget certainly has the government finances certainly got a little bit more flexibility, coming into February, or coming into the budget speech, than they had last year, where we had the problem was they couldn't pass the budget because of the controversial measures that were being taken, and clearly it was they were being squeezed as far as revenue and costs and disbursements. But this year they've got a little bit more flexibility on the revenue side because of the greater taxes that they're getting from the commodity sector, especially platinum and gold. And that we've got to see what they do with it. If they continue to ratchet up expenses, which is my fear, in other words, they're looking at welfare projects rather than investment, we need to see a budget that helps to shift resources towards investment, and that means we have to look at reducing wealth taxes, for instance, and hurdle rates like dividend taxes, etc. Those taxes need to be reduced and eased back to encourage investment.
Okay, so you've got a little bit of a downside marginally in unemployment figure for the last quarter. How do you think the Reserve Bank would look at these numbers in terms of expectations around monetary policy, interest rates, inflation targeting around 3.6% or so that the Reserve Bank is looking at?
Yeah, I just get the feeling that the Reserve Bank is going to look at another interest rate cut the next time they meet. Simply that we're seeing external signals. In other words, the Federal Reserve is expected to now cut rates in the US. That takes pressure off South Africa. In other words, there's a wider gap between South Africa and the US, and that would be able to be reduced somewhat with a rate cut. In other words, there's not as much pressure, and the inflationary pressures with the strength of the currency is also greatly reduced at the moment. And I think that the Reserve Bank will be inclined to cut. Ironically, it won't lead to much to rand weakness, because I think investors are looking to South Africa for potential pickup in growth at some stage in the future.
Interesting. So, confidence in South Africa's economic recovery, or does the shrinking labour market temper that optimism based on what we see from President Ramaphosa's administration in recent times in terms of the trade numbers and all of that, regardless of what the situation is or relationship between Pretoria and Washington at the moment?
Yeah, that relationship doesn't look like it's going to improve anytime soon. It is a strained relationship, and it's an unfortunate relationship at this stage, because the simple. If I could just reflect it, if basically trade with China, close your factories; trade with the US, you open factories. That's the big difference. And we've gone through a process of deindustrialization, and we do need to actually treasure the US trade relationship, because it does help support our manufacturing sector, and also our primary production, which has got important multipliers in the economy.
All right. Thank you so much. Let's leave it there for today. Thank you so much, Chris Hart, the Executive Chairman at Impact Africa Investment in South Africa. Thank you so much, out of Joburg. Have a great day. You're watching the Global Business Report here on the Nice News.